Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this NetBase Quid Live session. I'm Harvey Ragnola, Director of Demand Generation at NetBase Quid, and leading this session is Michael Trudeau of Intel. Before we get started, I did want to point out that there is a Q&A widget on the right side of your screen, so feel free to pop in any questions you might have throughout the presentation, and we'll try our best to get through as many of them at the end. With that, I'll go ahead and I'll hand it off to Michael.
All right, thanks, Harvey. Today, I'm here to talk about how we use Quid and AI in driving our corporate strategy. One of the use cases that we've really spent a lot of time on the last few years, and I think have done a pretty good job at accomplishing, is trying to predict M&A. M&A is obviously one of the biggest strategic moves a company can make, particularly in Intel's industry, in the semiconductor industry. As I'll show you, it's been a tool that many companies have been using. And for Intel, as the biggest company in the space, you really want to understand how your competitors that are all smaller than you are changing their strategies, their business models, their product offerings by completing big acquisitions. So let's walk through what we're going to talk about. I'll give you a little bit of the problem that we face and why it's so concerning for Intel. Then we can talk about the two different approaches we've used and what's worked in the past and how we've used that to build up a better future. And then finally, we'll look at the tool that we've developed and some results. So why do we care about M&A? Well, the first thing to realize is that the semiconductor industry has been consolidating quite a bit over the last few years. When we started this project around 2016, 2017, 2018, the M&A industry had gone through a big period of acquisitions. As you can see from the chart here, if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, you see the average number of deals or size of deals, the total amount of deals that are happening has been relatively small at the beginning part of this decade. Then in the middle part of the decade, it shot up for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't bore you with today. But again, that's something that concerns Intel, particularly when you see deals that tried to be completed but were killed for one reason or another, like Broadcom, Qualcomm, or Qualcomm NXP. It's signifying to us that the industry is shifting and the landscape is shifting. When we saw deals like Broadcom buying a company like CA, a software business, a hardware company buying a software business, that's another big red flashing light for Intel that something is happening here and something's changing. And so we, in our position as being the largest player in the space, need to be aware of these things, ideally before they happen, so that we can better inform our own strategy and our own decision making. And when we first encountered this problem, we kind of took a typical process for any type of strategy problem solving, right? We did a lot of research. We talked to external experts. We, Googled till our fingers bled, read all the journals and analyst reports, and it's great. And we were able to think a little bit better, a little more strategically. But that's not something that scales, right? It's hard for an analyst or two to spend a lot of time researching and reading and trying to get a lot out of that. And then, of course, leveraging the experts, they're typically relying on anecdotes and rumors. So we wanted to have a more data-driven approach that we could defend with executives, that we could put some faith behind. So throughout the last few years, we had been partnering with Quid on a number of different projects, but we really wanted to drive a more systematic approach to this particular problem. So what we decided to do was use Quid's natural language processing technology to read a whole bunch of text data at once and pull in financial data as well that would then give us the chance to have that data-driven solution. So we use things like earnings call transcripts that happen every quarter, every public company. We can grab that text, that conversation into the Quid platform. We use, of course, all the proprietary news and blogs platform that Quid has. And we also pulled in analyst reports from banks to start to build out this solution. And the nice thing about this approach is it's industry agnostic. It doesn't require an expert in the semiconductor industry to get started. It can be applied to every industry. It scales quickly. And we're also able to combine text and financial data, which is, I think you'll see in a few minutes, something that's really been a big breakthrough for us. Specifically how Quid helped us, the first thing they were able to do is process a ton of data. Right? So we were able to dump in all of that earnings transcript data, all those analyst reports, all the financial data, data that was already existing inside of Quid, data that we brought to Quid, data that we owned or that Quid was able to go out and source, and we were able to put it all into one place. Then we developed a data science-driven model to build out our prospect companies, our targets that we wanted to go think about, and we were able to use correlation metrics that, again, are proprietary to Quid to drive a lot of the analytics and the analysis here. Thirdly, we integrated the quantitative data. We'll talk more about that, but we're able to pull in all the financial data of particular companies and use that data to help inform our predictions. And then finally, we went off and created a new workflow that not only uses the Quid platform, but also still includes our subject matter experts. So we're able to pull in folks at Intel to kind of cross-check and give us guidance on what we're doing so that it's not purely a black box process and we didn't kick humans out completely. So here's the overview on a page and the process we go through. So the first thing to note is that we start from the perspective of a buying company, of a potential acquirer. So for example, Amazon or Apple. We say, what is Amazon's M&A criteria? And M&A criteria is another way of saying, what's their strategy for growth? How do they want to grow? What areas they want to invest in? And so to build out that criteria, we analyze those earnings transcripts, news and blogs, and analyst reports, and that gives us a number of criteria to go begin building our search off of. So for example, this could look like Amazon saying they want to expand their retail footprint in Asia, or Apple saying they want to build out their content portfolio. And so we grab all that criteria, and then we go into step 2 where we find prospect companies that meet that criteria for Amazon or Apple. And the way this works is we look for companies that first have a co-mention relationship with those buying companies. And what I mean by co-mention is that they're a potential or existing competitor, partner, supplier. They operate in the same industry in some way. So that's how we start to filter down the list. And then once we find companies with a previously existing or co-mention relationship with the buying company, we can then score that company on how strongly they match or fulfill the buying company's criteria. And then finally, we look at financial indicators. So we've done a baseline study of what an acquired company looks like from a financial perspective. And we have a number of different financial parameters that vary depending on the industry. But we have now been able to say how similar or dissimilar the company is to previously acquired companies. And we give them bonus points or takeaway points in our model for that. Then we take all of those different scores that come out of that process and we determine a M&A fit or what we call our acquisition likelihood. And likelihood's kind of maybe the wrong word to use because we're never saying a company's going to get acquired. We're saying relatively company A is a better fit for the buying company than company B. And so therefore it's got a better likelihood of being acquired. So how have we been doing? Let's look at some of the back testing we did first once we built this process. So what we did is we went off and looked at 15 big acquisitions that had happened before we ran this process, such as Amazon Whole Foods or Microsoft LinkedIn. And we hampered ourselves by only looking at data that was more than a year old from the date of acquisition. So if the company got acquired January 1st of 2018, we only used data that was older than January 1st, 2017. All right, so we gave ourselves a bit of a handicap. And we thought the results were pretty promising. So if you look at the table, the first column shows that on every one of these transactions, the target fit one of our criteria that we established in our first step. The second column gets really interesting because that's when we were actually predicting that exact acquisition. So 13 out of 15 times we had predicted, or our backtesting was able to show that we would have been able to predict Amazon buying Whole Foods. And what's really exciting to me is that when you look at the third column, only 5 out of those 15 cases was that acquisition predicted somewhere publicly, in a news blog, in an analyst report, in earnings commentary. Only 5 times, whereas we were able to predict that deal 13 out of 15 times. So we were able to do quite a bit better, I think, than the public information that we could have gotten if we were just researching on our own. And then the final column here shows where on the list did the acquisition, the prospect company, rank for the buying company. So for example, Amazon Whole Foods, we would have had 16 prospects, and we would have ranked Whole Foods number 8 for Amazon. If you look at the very next line, Avago Broadcom, we would have said Broadcom would have been the number 1 target for Avago. So you can see throughout the list here, a number of times we were able to not only make the right prediction, but it was the most accurate prediction. And we said this was the most likely company to be acquired by the buyer, and that's what happened. So here's a real life example of what we produce. So this is again for a buying company called Broadcom, which is one of the very active acquirers in Intel space. And the first thing you'll see is on the right, a whole bunch of strategic criteria. So again, that's that first step where we say, here's where we think the company is going to try to grow, which I think alone is very interesting information and very helpful for someone who's trying to figure out company strategy. And then on the left-hand side, you see all the prospect companies, the impact to Intel on the x-axis, that's scored by our subject matter experts. And then the likelihood of the acquisition, again, that's all relative, that's your y-axis. And when you look at this, I'm sure there's a lot of companies you don't recognize, but there's a mix of semiconductor companies. But something else kind of really popped out that was interesting is the second criteria, which is a software criteria. And again, that was a deal that really surprised us that they would go off and buy a software company. In fact, analysts were really shocked when it happened. They actually ended up buying this company CA in the lower left-hand corner in July of 18. We'd actually run this just a month or so sooner. And it was a really funny story when it happened, and analysts were kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out why Broadcom would do this. In fact, our CEO at the time called my former boss and said, hey, why is this happening? What's going on here? Everybody's kind of shocked. And I had to chuckle and think, well, we had it the whole time. So we were really proud of that as our first one out of the gate. Now, I do think that also raised expectations a little too much. The goal at the end of the day is not necessarily to continually make perfect predictions. The goal is to help companies, or help my company at least, think more strategically about M&A that's happening around them, what could happen, and help you prepare for that. It's a nice side benefit to be able to make accurate predictions. In fact, we've been, despite that, we've been really accurate. And when you look at all the playbooks we've done across a number of different buyers, and you pull out the companies that are most mentioned, you can start to get a indication of how good we've been at making predictions. And what's interesting is the most predicted prospect company is a company called Xilinx. And we first forecasted in June of 18 that they might get bought. And that actually just happened. AMD announced they're buying Xilinx. And you can see a number of different acquisitions on here. We've got 5 that we accurately predicted. And the nice little indicator, I think, of this is to look at the company's stock price before we made the prediction, and then what their stock price is now, or the date they were acquired. And obviously, when a company gets bought, their stock price goes up. But even if they're an attractive company that might get bought one day, we could see their stock price rise. So you can see on the far column here the percent change in their stock prices from when we made the prediction to now. And even more interestingly, when you take those companies and you put them in a portfolio and compare it to the S&P 500, for example, you can see that our companies that we predicted as potentially being acquired, their stock has been outperforming the S&P by nearly 2x. Now, our intent's not to be like a hedge fund and make money on this information. But like I said, I think it's a good indicator that we're making accurate predictions. So here's kind of a summary of all the stuff we've done. We've built 18 playbooks to date, and you can see the first row there shows all the different companies we've looked at, a mix of competitors of ours, customers of ours as well. And the results, I think, have been pretty good. Again, we've looked at we've able to identify over 800 companies as prospects. Those 800 prospects turned into at least 70 collaborations that we were able to identify before they happened between the buyer and the prospect. 8 times the buying company made an investment, didn't necessarily buy the company, but made an investment in the prospect. 5 times there were rumors of takeovers about to happen, and we were able to predict at least 7 acquisitions correctly. A quick deep dive here on Microsoft, because I think it's a great example of where even if an acquisition doesn't happen, you can see a bunch of collaborations. So on the left-hand side, you see their M&A criteria again. We identified 47 different prospects for them to potentially go out and buy. A number of those turned into collaborations, some that might be obvious, some that are maybe less obvious. 1 rumored acquisition around Adobe, and then 1 completed acquisition around Bethesda. Bethesda is a big gaming company, and they fit into this 5th criteria, obviously very nicely for Microsoft. And they just announced earlier this year they're going to spend nearly $8 billion for the owner of Bethesda, the gaming company. And it's actually one of the largest, if not the largest acquisition in the video game industry ever. So it was pretty, I think, big move from Microsoft, a big industry shaping move from Microsoft. And we were able to predict it before it happened. But, doing these playbooks and having great predictions is not enough. So we found the ability to move this outside of just competitive intelligence to be crucial. So not only can we say, here's what we think Broadcom's going to do, but we want to start using this for insights for our business units. Because if we can do this for our competition, why can't we turn the tool on us? So let's go off and try to make suggestions to folks in our various business teams about who they should be partnering with or talking to or monitoring. In fact, our gaming team is a company, our group I'm going to show you in a second here. They love this. And it's interesting because I think as a day-to-day, office worker, you're not seeing all of the benefits AI or NLP or these different tools are providing to your normal workflow. But if you're a business development manager and you're trying to find new companies in your space, and then we can use this tool to provide you a list of companies that are prioritized based on a number of different factors, it kind of starts to give you a list of companies to call on in order of priority, and it makes your job and your life a little bit easier. So it's something you can touch and feel and use in your day-to-day job that makes it a little bit easier. So I'm excited that our business units have found this tool useful. And here's an example of what you might see as a gaming biz dev person. If you're trying to find new companies in the mobile gaming space or that do gamer engagement or distribution, or even if you want to think about the gambling space as another form of gaming. Now we can give you a whole number of companies, some you'll have heard of, but the magic really happens when someone sees this list and they go, well, who's that company? I've never heard of them before. What do they do? Why are they showing up here? Someone should go look into them, right? That's the aha moment that we're always shooting for with this type of data. Just to start to wrap up here, one of the other things that we've done with Quid that I'm really excited about around this tool is that we've built kind of a go-to-market partnership where it's an opportunity for us to kind of demonstrate our AI-enabled strategy office and hopefully even generate some revenue. We can leverage our joint connections to have sales meetings and go off and try to share this with folks that are even on this call and talk about how we're using AI to be strategy, or how we're using AI to drive our strategy. And it's a nice relationship that I think we have with Quid through doing this tool. And then just to wrap up, we've done some really great stuff, I think. We've completed 18 playbooks. We've identified 7 acquisitions. Our acquisition portfolio has a 40% return if you wanted to look at it that way. But it also gives us a very much more complete picture of what we think our competitors are going to do, particularly in a time where there's a lot of acquisitions and change in our industry, and it's affected by all kinds of different macroeconomic forces. This really helps gives us that a better picture. And then finally, of course, like I just said, it helps us identify opportunities that we might want to go use to grow. So giving our biz dev and our internal teams kind of a cheat sheet of companies to look at. So with that, I'll say thanks, and hopefully this is helpful information to you guys.
This is great. Thank you so much, Michael. Definitely really interesting, especially with the different use cases and some of the results that you guys have been able to generate over the last couple of years. I'm sure that a lot of the folks who are watching find this all really interesting. And I know personally, I'm quite interested in the predictor. I mean, considering the success that you're able to demonstrate with that particular tool, I'm going to shift it over to some of the questions from the audience members shortly. But I'm curious myself, in terms of how long it took to develop that with your team, how long did it take for you to get to that point where you had confidence in the data that's being put out by the predictor, and to continue honing it so that it continues to be a lot more accurate as you use it?
Yeah, so I think we took around 3 to 6 months through, whiteboarding to testing to tweaking to kind of get to the point where we are today, where we have that workflow. We know what data we want to ingest, we know how to do it, and we can just kind of run whenever we feel the need. We also talk a lot about other data that we want to pull in. To be honest, we haven't gotten around to it because we've been so busy just running the existing data. But we want to start using other things, other sources of information that I think will help give us an even better picture. But it took us around 36 months to get there overall.
Right. That's a lot shorter than I was expecting. So it's great to hear that you're able to come up with something that was as effective in such a short span of time. And you did mention that, when you're looking at traditional methods of doing this kind of research and how that took a significant amount of time. You joked about how you could Google until your fingers bleed before you actually start getting to results and data that you could actually ingest and start analyzing and processing. But when you think about the leaps and bounds that you guys have made in terms of transitioning from that traditional model to using Quid to enable your team to be able to run this kind of analysis, when we look at, you've been working with Quid for a couple of years now. If we look at the same time frame, so 3 to 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, how do you see your processes, just considering the new data that's available, consistently, new data that's available on a daily basis, as well as new tools that are available outside of even just Quid? How do you see this process evolving and developing for your team in the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, so the biggest thing we want to do is automate more of this. So the downside of this tool right now, it takes about 2 weeks to turn out a playbook. We think we can get that down to a day or two through increased automation. So it's not necessarily bringing in bringing new data will be nice. It'll be a lot easier to do, but I think the biggest opportunity for improvement is to automate this and make this more of a standalone tool that analysts at Intel can just pull up anytime they want, type in a company name, and go try to, see what the results are. So our own version of Googling, but with actually using data and a process methodology behind it. So that's probably the thing we would do.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go ahead and I'll take a look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience members. I'm going to try to paraphrase these as best as I can. But in the beginning of your presentation, you did talk about the overall methodology and how that still involves subject matter experts. How important is it to continue including them and not necessarily overly rely on automation or the data that you're able to pull from these tools?
Yeah, for us, it's critical. The semiconductor space is pretty complex with, some very unique companies, and the tool doesn't necessarily know, how well two companies will fit together based on the technology that they're using, for example. So that's where our experts can come in and say, well, actually, these two companies would never be able to work together because they're on completely different platforms, for example. So you should take that off the list. And that's great. We love that. We do get a lot of false positives, and that's where our subject matter experts can guide us. The other thing that they are critical in, of course, is determining the impact to Intel of a particular transaction. And we add that score because, obviously, I said earlier, we've identified something like 800 prospects. We can't possibly think about what we would do in each of those cases. So that impact to Intel score gives us a way to zoom in on the things that really matter to Intel. And again, it's not something I'd ever expect the tool to know or the algorithm to know or Quid to know, because ultimately we should know our business the best. And I think it'd be really hard to ever automate or put an algorithm around that.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. The last question that we have, it looks like we have time for just about one more, is around using Quid data. So with Quid, at least for those who are familiar with the product and know what some of these visualizations look like, sometimes it could be somewhat intimidating because there's so much data in there, and you have to go in there and clean up a bit just to ensure that you're able to pull these nuggets of information that are actually useful to you. And we did notice that in your presentation that there are some slightly modified visualizations in the way that you're presenting the data. And so for the folks who you do present some of this data to, how do you ensure that you're pulling the right information and presenting it in a way that makes sense for the audience that you're presenting it to?
Yeah, and it's a great point, especially when you look at a Quid network map, your eyes kind of glaze over, especially if you're not used to looking at those types of things, and you get confused and like, what are all these colors and what does the size of the circle mean, and what is all this supposed to mean? It's just I can't do anything with this. It's too much. It's sensory overload. So one of the other things that I think we did really well and that I'm proud of is that we're able to take that information. And there's a network behind it, each of these. So you can essentially imagine the network in this case is for a particular company, right? And the nodes are a particular prospect, and they're all clustered around a particular criteria, right? So those are the different clusters, and the Quid map is a criteria. So we got out of that format though, because it just wasn't very helpful to use that as a demonstration method. And I think that's been one of the keys to getting people to use this information, is to show, look, forget about the network, forget about all the data that's going behind it. Look at this list of companies and tell me if you care. And we can convince you why you should care and why one thing is ranked above the next through our process. And we can talk about the data we use, but ultimately just stare at the companies and forget about the network for the time being.
Right. It's great that you were able to explain a little bit of that and some of your processes behind it to ensure that people are actually finding the value in some of the analysis, as opposed to seeing something that could potentially be intimidating to them that's really hard to interpret. We actually have spoken to quite a few folks who have done something similar, where they've taken the data and they put it in a way that represents the data in a way that's easy to digest for the audience that they're presenting it to. That being said, with Quid, even for myself, I do remember when I was starting out, feeling that same intimidation when I looked at a network for the first time, but it's one of those things where it's almost like riding a bike, where it's quite challenging initially, but then once you get the hang of it, then you kind of just want to keep going and start analyzing, seeing these connections and developing the stuff that allows you to be able to present it in a way that actually makes sense for folks who are not familiar with visualization. So really appreciate your insight on that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll wrap this up. Like I said, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us for this event, especially in the current state of things where we have to do all this stuff virtually. Unfortunately, we're not able to do this in person. We would love to be able to do this in an in-person setting, but we do appreciate your time, and we thank you so much for this presentation. Some really amazing work that you've done with the Quid team and with your own internal team, with the way that you've been able to leverage this data and to put together these models that have been incredibly accurate. Really, really great stories. For the folks who are on the session, we do encourage you to take a look at the other sessions that are happening throughout our event. We've got 3 days worth of events. We're close to 30 or more sessions that are just as interesting as some of the stories that you heard today from Michael. So lots of really interesting content out there. I encourage you to go ahead and register for them. If you've missed any sessions that look interesting to you, we're actually going to make these available on demand after the event. So don't worry if you've missed an event or a session that you wanted to attend, it will be available at the end of the week. We also encourage you to hop on social media, on your Twitter, on your Instagram, take a look at the hashtag NetBaseQuidLive, and check out the discussions, join in, and we really hope that you have a great time watching all these sessions and sharing these with your colleagues. Thank you all once again for watching this session, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your time at NetBaseQuid Live.